Today we're joined again by James Bach, who is going to finish our conversation around driving well driven, the way of the skilled tester. We got cut off last time, and we're going to start where we left off last time around what it takes to transition to be a context-driven tester, or what would be James' advice for someone who was wishing to become a context-driven tester. So, James, I'm going to pick up right where we left off and say, for the people who listened to the first part of this conversation, what would be your advice for that person? What do they do next?
I have three specific suggestions for how to get going and how to keep going as a context-driven tester. And the first thing is to study experiment design, to become comfortable with the logic of experimentation. And I went online and found a few nice pages that deal with that, which I would be putting in the chat window right now, except I'm looking at the chat, and I don't see how I can actually send a message out to the attendees. So I guess I'm stuck that way, but maybe you can.
Yes, if you
because I gave the links to you.
Okay.
This is a very important skill. It's a fundamental core skill of software testing that you don't get by hearing about test techniques. The classic way to train software testers is to give them a bunch of words corresponding to so-called test techniques. Words like positive testing, negative testing, black box testing, integration testing, regression testing, and these are supposedly techniques, heuristics essentially that you can use to test with, but they all gloss over the fundamental underlying skill, which is the ability to create a controlled experiment. So you won't find it in testing textbooks, but you will find it in websites and books for scientists. And there's a bunch of books out there. I've got some. My favorite one is a book with the imposing title, Experimental and Quasi-Experimental Designs for Generalized Causal Inference, I think is what it's called. I just love carrying around that book because the book just causes people to get out of your way. Like, back off, man, I'm a scientist. You know?
Is it by weight? It's a large book?
It's a weighty book. It's a weighty book. But I got to tell you, it's a book written by someone who understands good writing. It's very readable book. You start reading it, and the author just invites you in. It's not written in that forbidding academic mode, and it's full of these pages that have these detailed bullet lists of different things to think about. I love those bullet lists. It really makes the material more accessible. So I recommend that, but it is a big deal to get through that. So there are these websites that I found that are mostly university type websites, which make that process a lot easier. And there's one other book that's quite readable, which is called Exploring Science by an author named Klahr, Klahr, and that explores what goes on in people's minds when they do informal experimentation, and it's really fascinating, very useful.
I just want to interject a question there. Why do you mentioned earlier about you won't find the design of experiments in most of the kind of mainstream, for lack of a better word, testing material, training material, literature around testing. But yet the kind of heart and soul of testing is in experiment design, and from kind of the hard sciences. What's your view on where that happened? Where's the deviation? Where did the word test get hijacked from its kind of scientific origins? Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think mainly it's because testing is so easy to fake. That really is what it is. And here's what I mean. When I joined Apple Computer in 1987, I it was May 21st, 1987, and I remember that day. For me, that was one of the biggest days of my life. It was the first time I'd ever worked in an office building. I was working at Apple Computer. It was like going to heaven and trying to make it with the angels, to prove that I could be an angel. So it was so amazing, and and I was surrounded by 400 testers. Now they weren't all in my group, but they were all in my building. We were all in one place, and all the testers were together in several floors of a single building, De Anza Boulevard in Cupertino. And so they're all around me. There are testers, and since I don't know anything about testing, I start asking people about testing. And how do I do this, and how do you keep track of things? And what I quickly found out in the first couple of weeks of getting to know people is that no one seemed to know how to do anything. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. But what quickly became apparent is, look, you just sort of muddle through and you don't get fired, and you muddle through and you don't get fired, and you muddle through and you still don't get fired. And this leads to a situation where I had an argument with a guy who was using these bullshit metrics in estimation, who told me in New Zealand a few years ago that he'd been using this spreadsheet and this mathematical method for 22 years, and it's always been a success. And I said, you mean you haven't been fired? That's what you mean, right? And he goes, no, it's been a success. Well, how do you know it was a success? All you know is that no one, I'm taking you at your word. What you mean is that no one complained. But why would they complain? They have no idea what you're doing, and they don't care as long as it doesn't create a problem for them. So, unfortunately, since unlike coding, you don't have to produce anything as a tester that it does any functional thing. Um, it's very easy to fake, and that means that just like fake diet programs that don't work, just like exercise equipment that doesn't work, just like appliances that you might buy that immediately break down, you can stay in business for a long time or indefinitely offering products to people that don't work if it's hard for them to tell whether they're working or not, and it might plausibly be working.
But
So this creates a tremendous laxness in our industry that can only be solved by us keeping each other honest, which we do in the CDT world. That's what makes us a little bit special, is that we're critical of each other. That's an important aspect of what our community is.
But I think you've touched on two things there that particularly irritate me about the kind of software testing business, is that there is this perception that good testing or context-driven testing doesn't produce anything, and which I don't think is entirely accurate, and that I think that's a counter to the kind of fake testing world that produces tons of stuff to try and counter that. It's more difficult to articulate what good testing looks like sometimes.
Yeah, you're right.
You
You're
know
right.
what I'm saying?
I was speaking in a shorthand fashion. Of course, we good testing does produce something. We produce actionable information that can be depended upon to make better decisions. And the
I
thing
think
is
it's a
that
real problem, though. It's a real problem that, like, why people think it's the same logic to me that people use when they try and explain away exploratory testing as playing with the system. Yeah, I think that comes from the same place, that there's no structure around exploring, or that it doesn't produce anything as well. And I think that's some of the marketing and branding problems that, you know, in some cases are very overtly kind of those things are launched at
yes,
CDP, and sometimes just, I think, just out of ignorance. Um,
yeah, of course. That's why to counteract that we have to study it. So if somebody plays that line with me, then I can flood them with links and stacks of books and studies, and I can connect the exploratory approach to at least two Nobel Prize winning thinkers, and so I'm not vulnerable to that. I just roll over it like a tank, and a lot of people, I have enemies. I have people who criticize me, but I think if you pay attention to what my enemies say about me, you'll notice that very little is ever said along the lines of, he doesn't read very much. He doesn't know what he's doing.
right.
What a stupid man. They don't say that. They say I'm aggressive. They say I'm annoying. But they don't say that I haven't had much of an education in these things, and I take care to make sure that I've always read more than any of the people that I'm debating with. Um, who, I mean, one of the basis of the debate is that the people that I'm trying to criticize are, generally speaking, extremely comfortable not questioning, and that means that they have to avoid reading. They have to avoid studying, otherwise, their their idea of the world will get profoundly disturbed, and they won't be able to deal with things. So a lot of their strategy is to claim that studying philosophy, studying logic, studying experiment design is irrelevant and testers don't really need it, and I'm just an elitist who's making all this stuff up. And
Well,
I'm
I,
comfortable with that sort of criticism.
right, and I think that, sorry to interrupt, but I think what I find is that those people who want to redefine testing as a very simple, commoditized activity that doesn't require any philosophical thought, or or isn't subject to any kind of abstract forces, are typically the folks that get bitten in the rear most often by those things. And then when you point that out and give them some evidence around where their problems actually lie, they tend to come around rather quickly, that, it's not just about how many test cases you had, or how many, scripts we're going to run. Your problems are actually a bit more difficult than that to solve. I also think some of the language around testing, and like people not wanting to be called a test analyst, I've never had a problem with that. And I think some of the, more engineering language has been used around programming. And again, that I think that has a knock-on effect into how the testing is perceived, or testers are perceived. And
Well, yeah, and that's why Michael Bolton and I made such a push about distinguishing between testing and checking. It's the same reason that programmers need to distinguish between programming and compiling. They need to separate the world of machines and what machines can do from the world of humans and what humans can do. And we need to do that in testing, and we have failed to do that in testing as a broader community. And that's one of the reasons why people keep thinking of us as a commodity profession, which leads people to not want to join us, and a lot of the smart people don't want to be testers. I kind of like that just because it makes it easy for me as an intellectual to be impressive, But on the other
I'm
hand,
a big fan of the
I
no-no
wouldn't
as
really
well.
mind if more intellectuals joined our community. And also, I think there's lots of people who would be intellectuals if they would spread their wings, and I try to help them spread their wings.
I would agree, and I think the one of the things to draw a slight parallel to the agile community or agile movement or whatever you want to call it, which I find to be a bit imperialistic and as well very overrun with coaches and consultancy selling all sorts of crazy ideas. But I think what it does is when folks try to do or companies try and do an agile transition, and we've found a lot of work this way actually coming behind coaches and helping them address the testing their testing deficiencies and their like we've got this they have to rethink the world a little bit and if you're going to require people to do more than just run through thousands of scripts, it does shine a light where skilled testing can come in and fill that void. I don't think Agile addresses testing in the same way that CDT does or skilled testing does, but I think if anything, we found it as a tool to shine a light on where folks have not thought through their testing approach appropriately and are trying to like shoehorn their giant test factory into an agile or agile at scale type of model. So
Right, I think weirdly, agile testing ends up being factory testing in many cases because they so love their tools and they so don't want to learn how to test.
yeah, what are we going
Uh,
to do with all these scripts?
yeah. Hey, I've got two other things I was going to suggest about getting started in the
So number one
context-driven
is design,
milieu.
learning about the designing of
Number one
the
is experiment design, studying experiment design. Now there's a game that we play called the dice game, which is a wonderful way to practice experiment design. And unfortunately, I have to do it in person with people, so it's hard for me to do as well. I can't do it as an online thing. It requires physical dice and physical presence to play this game. But there are two other things. One is practice modeling systems, both informally and formally. So when I say modeling systems, usually the first reaction people have is they get intimidated because they think that I mean formal UML modeling and they groan. That's not what I'm talking about. Now you could, of course, that is part of what I'm talking about. Practicing creating UML state models will definitely help you getting better at the analysis aspects of testing. But it doesn't have to be like that. For instance, I remember being in Amsterdam some years ago, and I was waiting for somebody for a dinner engagement, and they were late. So I went out on the street corner in the middle of Amsterdam and set myself the challenge of making a list of every single system that I could see from the street corner. And it was an intellectual exercise, see how many things I could find, the different signaling systems, the social systems, and physical systems, and energy distribution systems, and communication, and weather, and protect systems that protect you from the weather. And it was that's the kind of exercise I'm talking about, looking at a system and identifying its variables, identifying its structures, identifying its dynamics. That's what I mean when I say modeling a system.
and
Mo-
how would you like to see that articulated? Are you talking about mapping it out using mind maps or
well, a simple way to do it is to make a simple list of all of the variables or factors that go into something. So for instance, here's an example. Yesterday, I was coaching a tester. Testers come to me on Skype out of the blue and demand coaching from me in different ways. And it's just like when my dog shows up at 5 a.m. and starts barking next to my bed until I give her a treat, and I just can't resist because she's so cute. Um, I often, when people show up and demand that I help them in various somewhat friendly ways, I usually say yes. So this fella showed up yesterday, and I had dealt with him before, and his idea was he wanted to know how to overcome confirmation bias, and we quickly figured out that confirmation bias wasn't his problem. His problem is that when he was asked to test something, he didn't have many ideas. What he really needed to get over, it seemed to me, was the lack of ideas. So he was talking about logging in and how he would just try valid credentials and log in with valid credentials, and then he would run out of ideas. So after prompting him for a little bit, I decided to just flood him with a list of variables. So I said, well, how about browser type? How about network connection type, network connection state, validity of user account, validity of password, login, the login page itself and the different things on the login page, the speed of processing while logging in, whether the account is locked, what kind of account it is, admin, regular, or guest, how fast type, any delays that you make, other web tabs that are currently active. Now I'm typing this out as fast as I can think of it. And as I was typing, what was so cool is the guy I'm coaching, he starts throwing in ideas his own. He starts to get the idea. Oh, yeah, brainstorm. And he threw in things like, let's see, forgot password, client-side validation, password strength, how password is transported through the network, timeouts, session maintenance. That all this is interleaved with my thing as I'm typing as fast as I can. And his imagination starts filling out like a sponge that has no water in it, and then you put water on it and it starts expanding and getting flexible. I could feel this guy's brain unrigifying, just turning into flexible noodles
You
that
smell
can
the smoke from the synapses firing, eh?
that's right. And that was really the problem, because before I started doing that, I would ask him, well, what other testing could you do? And how do you know that that's good? And he's like, oh, I just don't have any ideas. And I'm thinking, man, you're surrounded by all kinds of levers and buttons that you could push and things you could look at and things you can try, and you're not seeing any of it, but you can see it and you know how to see it. Part of it is that our education systems in our world are so bad that they're so focused on trying to guess what the teacher wants you to say instead of actually think about solving problems.
Right.
So a lot of what I do is kind of problem solving therapy, where I get them to solve problems over and over again until they discover that their minds can do more than they thought they could do. So that practicing modeling systems, which may lead to a list or an outline or a mind map of product factors, or it may be a picture that you draw, a diagram. That's another way to practice modeling. And you can do that informally. That is to say, build a model in your mind in the form of an idea of what the product is, and then turn that around in your mind and try to drill yourself or talk to somebody else and say, here's what I think everything that's going on with this system, and then they can react to that. You can do that informally, or you can get a book on UML and make an enhanced state model, which I did once. And that was an interesting exercise, learning to do that, and that helped me, I think.
Well, I think that's one of the things you're touching on as well is, and I know it's part of the kind of context-driven testing ethos, is the idea of practice. And I think of
Practice, yes.
so many people and testers that I talk to that want to get involved in the community or use new things or try different things are, kind of frozen by this idea of the first time they have to try and model something is on a live project, or the brainstorming, because this ties into kind of Paul Holland's talk he's doing this year around good bad idea, good idea, bad idea, bad idea, good idea. Like, you have to get through a few things before you get to a good one, and that a lot of the brainstorming effect can have, at the start, maybe some very shallow things that you have to get through to find the more deeper meaning in them, or better ideas. But people get frozen by the idea of doing it for the very first time. I can't do that on at my client or my project because I've never done it before. And this idea of practice, I think, is such a strong thing that you advocate for.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what helps is supervised practice. I mean, you don't need supervised practice. Orville Wright learned to fly an airplane without a flight instructor, but having a flight instructor makes your practice more productive, perhaps safer,
He was kind of out in
and
front of flight instruction as well. So
yeah. So now the third thing that I would suggest in this trinity, experiment design, practice your modeling, which of course ties into experiment design. The third thing is practice noticing how stuff really gets done. People are strangely lost in the world of how stuff is supposed to get done. They aren't seeing how stuff really gets done. And I have a story about that I want to tell, because it's a very personal story and it's very vivid as an example of how blind you can be. I worked with a personal assistant many years ago. My company, ST Labs, they got me a personal executive assistant and that was great. It's personal executive secretary that I could have do anything I want her to do. And so she organized my library and different things. And one of the things I asked her to do was to completely manage my schedule. So she bought me this watch, which got programmed every day with all of my appointments, and it would automatically beep at me when I was supposed to go somewhere, and I'd look at my watch and it would tell me where to go. And she had scheduled my every day down to, in the minute. But there was a problem because she had scheduled in email time, and I was supposed to spend the first hour of every day doing my email. But she kept finding me at different places in the test lab, wandering around, talking to people. And she said, "You're supposed to be doing your email. What are you doing?" And my reaction was, "Oh my God, I totally forgot." I started doing email, and then somehow I got distracted. I feel so stupid. So this happened day after day, and finally, after about a week of being yelled at by my executive assistant because I wasn't doing what she told me to do, and this, you know, uh, uh, later became the story of my life, because now my wife does this because she's the office manager of my of my company. What I did is I decided I would watch myself very, very carefully to find out what was going wrong. And here's what I discovered when I actually opened my eyes to it. I found out that doing email, contrary to my assumption that I'd been making, isn't a matter of reading an email and writing a response to it. It's a matter of reading an email, perceiving the to-do item that is embedded in the email, trying to do the to-do item so that I could write the reply. So what was happening is I'd read an email, go, oh, I better go take care of that, and then I would leave my desk and try to take care of it. The weird thing is that I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. So I just felt like I was being flaky and not having discipline, when actually what I was doing was using my discipline to try to get my email done. Uh, it's so bizarre that I was doing this. I was doing it consciously, and yet when asked to describe my process, I was unconscious of what the real process was, and would have described it as playing around or letting myself get distracted. And after that, I resolved to take the process of being distracted much more seriously and not just shrug it off and as if it wasn't important. Instead, I would ask myself, what is important about this new process that is drawing me to it, and why is that now an important thing to do? Because it is important to do. These things aren't just distractions. So if that can happen to me in my own process that I myself set up, then surely it can happen to other people. And I think all around us, we have people doing test processes that they don't really understand. They don't know, and they don't understand because they haven't looked. They haven't just stopped and said, what actually happens at this meeting? Who talks? Why do they talk? What do they say? What do they not say? What are they allowed to say? Why are they allowed to say it?
Right.
Uh,
And then what happens
and
afterwards? What actually happens afterwards?
right. So it's because I started taking that attitude that I could deal with situations like when a program manager gets angry in a meeting and says, "Oh, you guys told me that you could make this date, and now you can't make the date." And then I can analyze that and say, well, maybe part of the problem is you asked us publicly instead of meeting with us privately. How about time you meet with each person individually and privately so that they can be more honest with you, more open with you, instead of just challenging us all with no preparation in public for estimations. And you've got to be able to analyze things like that. You've got to be able to question and debug processes instead of immediately jumping to this thing where the problem is a moral problem of well, someone just isn't trying hard enough, or
Right.
I'm not trying hard enough, and that can sometimes be the issue. Maybe you aren't trying hard enough. But I think there's so much more interesting things that are potentially going on,
Yeah.
and we've got to learn to watch carefully what the real process is. Now, I gotta say, there's a reason why people don't do that, and that's because the real process is sometimes embarrassing or socially unacceptable. Like if you start really watching yourself, you start noticing that you're a little bit racist, that you're a little bit sexist, and maybe you feel ashamed of that. And uh, I noticed when the very first time I taught at Perscalis, I had to take the subway to the Bronx, and I'd never done that before. In fact, I had barely ever ridden on the subway before. And I was really nervous about that because I look around and no one looks like me. And I wasn't worried about them. I'm worried about whether it's okay with them that I am there.
Right.
I don't mind that they're there, but is it okay that I'm here? I don't know. I look totally different from everyone else. I felt like a minority, and I had not, I'm not naturally normally having that experience. So I had to get used to that. It took me about 3 days, and I started my whole brain kind of went through a transformation just being in the Bronx. And maybe this has happened. It's probably happened to you long ago, Keith. But for me, it was really vivid how I went from wondering whether I belong there to feeling like this is my team.
Right.
These are my people.
Right.
It is not okay with me that these people have any trouble finding work because of the color of their skin. That shall not stand. That is how I felt after spending a few days with these amazing people at Perscalis who are trying so hard and they just want a chance to be productive in their lives and
Right.
to be reasonably rewarded for that like anyone else is. And and I guess for me the transformation happened so quickly that it was really noticeable.
Right.
But that's part of what I'm talking about is noticing yourself, noticing what you do, accepting the mistakes that you make, but then trying to learn from them, accepting the pettiness of humanity, but then struggling with it, because that's what makes us moral creatures. It's not that we aren't racist. It's what makes us moral creatures is that we struggle with our racism, that we work at it, like digging a hole in the sand that keeps getting filled in again. But you do make some progress. You
Right.
make, and you have to make progress to be a good person in a civilized society that includes more than just your one tribe. In
Right.
other words, to be a good pluralist. That's what I am.
Right.
I'm a pluralist. And I believe in living in the world full of people who aren't like me, and to make sure they have enough space so that they get to live too.
Well,
And that,
to
yeah.
kind of draw an analogy on this, with at a really really interesting conversation a couple weeks ago with one of our step grads, Cochran Williams, that actually went through Michael's RST class for one.
That guy's amazing. I had a conversation with him
Yeah,
in the lunchroom at Perscalis. I predict big things for him.
yeah, he is. He's just starting a new project this week, but he after about new tester, right? You've got lots of life experience, new tester. After a couple weeks of being on his project that we had him on to start, you rang me up and he's like, I need to talk to you about something because he was having a little trouble internally, internal struggle, and he started talking to me about what was really about how his internal model for how he tests and his really biorhythm and when he's awake and alert and when he feels productive and when he gets into code and he can really focus was out of sync with the project. And he felt like the project was just, every morning we have a stand up and then everyone goes away and tests and codes and then we get back in the afternoon. And it's like, he's like, I feel like it should be a little more organic as a group, that we should be understanding how our natural work patterns are and try and make those congruent or dissonant. I was like, that's
That
actually a
that
really
is
deep thing.
CDT, man. That is CDT
Yeah, I was
right
like, that's
there.
a really, really astute observation for someone, one, who's brand new to testing, but I think
Yeah.
ties in directly into what you're talking about around being observant of how things get done.
Exactly. So that is the context of your physical state, of the group's physical state, and things can work the way that he's suggesting, but in order to do that, people have to realize that they make the rules, that they are in charge, and the rules must support the people. And so that's a struggle, and people have to be willing to go through that struggle. But that is CDT. That is a CDT mentality right there. So I was right about him.
You
He's a
know,
really impressive guy. I mean, you spend 2 minutes with him, and you know you're dealing with a thinking man.
yeah, no, he's got good things ahead of him, and so look, I'm looking at the time here, and we've got one question that's come through. I'd like to open it
Okay.
up the questions to the attendees. One has come through that we can ask, and then go from there. But if there's people online who want to start, adding more questions here, now they're coming in. We'll just start through these. So the
All
first,
right, just ask me whatever you
you
got.
got it. I got it right here. So the first one's from Vernon Richards. Hello, Vernon.
Hey,
Um,
Vernon.
the first question is, I'm just going to read these off. They're coming in his text. Do you have an example of something I might learn from the science book recommendations that I would be able to apply at work tomorrow?
At work tomorrow. Okay. Um, that it depends what your mental state and situation is. Uh, however, I will give you a recommendation right now for a particular paper on collaboration, which is a study of experiment design that compared people who did experiment design by themselves and people who did experiment design in pairs. And the paper is called Collaborative Discovery in a Scientific Domain, and one of the authors is Herbert Simon, who is an amazing guy, was an amazing guy, Nobel laureate, uh, and in that paper, he does experiments, and what they show is that if two people are working together and they're designing experiments and they ask each other a specific kind of question, which is a question about causality, questions about factuals and counterfactuals, such as what would happen if, or maybe this is happening because of this. What do you think would happen if we did that? Uh, what variables are affecting that? You know, those questions like that. What they found is when people working together ask questions of a causal nature to each other, they were far more productive at experimenting and getting to the truth of the matter than people who did not ask questions like that. So that's an example of something you can apply tomorrow. You know, when you read these kinds of papers, you get lots of that kind of idea where you go, oh, okay, so it isn't just talking to each other that makes us productive when we're pairing up. It's talking about the structure and dynamics specifically of the thing that we're investigating. So let me practice uh, asking questions and having those kinds of conversations. And there are examples of such questions in that paper. So that's one example. Um, Another thing is that I think, Vernon, that you should watch yourself the next time that you're testing and notice the the sequence of logic that you follow when you are performing an observation of the system that you are testing. And if you read about experiment design, you'll find out that they've come up with this pretty simple method of describing the sequence of the logic of experiment. For instance, there are experiments where you do something and you see what happens. That's a very, very simple kind of experiment. And some people would say that's not really an experiment. But then there's another way, which is first you observe the state of the system, then you do something, then you observe after that. That's called an OXO experiment. O, observe, X, do something, O, observe again. But then there are other ones where you divide into a control system and a system that you are going to do something with, and you make observations of both systems, and then you take an action only in one system, not in the other one, and then you make an observation at the end. And this is because you're trying to find out if the effect that you are observing would have happened anyway. In other words, we had go to webinar crash on Keith's system last time we tried to do this webinar, and well, maybe it would have crashed anyway, even if he hadn't had go to webinar running. Maybe if we hadn't had a webinar going at the time, it still would have malfunctioned, or maybe it needs to have a webinar going at the time in order to malfunction that way. So when you read about this stuff about experiment design and different ways of organizing observations and interventions, you can immediately apply that in the form of being more sensitive, more aware of the different kinds of uses of logic and the different kinds of strategies that you are using tomorrow as you are testing. Becoming more aware of that stuff is the first step to doing it better.
I think actually having some outside observation on you while you're testing as well, not necessarily pairing as much.
That helps a lot, sure.
But just have because pairing seems to imply you're actively testing together, but just someone watching you and asking you questions, not about the test your process or your methods that you're using as opposed to trying to test together. So, right,
Sure.
second question in here. This is an interesting one. This is coming from Alexis Talonen. Apologies if I've butchered your name. His question is, what kind of relation do you think there is with leadership and context-driven testing? Are context-driven testers leaders?
Context-driven testers have to be leaders. There's no way around it. In order to be a context-driven tester, you must be a methodologist. You must study your own methods and you must choose your own methods. And that is a form of leadership, of self-leadership right there. And then you might lead others as well. And if you're leading others, then a lot of what you find you need to do is to coach them, because this is how we're going to get good at our craft as an entire community, is we've got to help each other. What you'll find is that an ethos in the context driven world is we help each other. We help each other get good at our work. And what you'll also find is, if you look at my behavior on Twitter or on forums, you'll find that I'm often like angry and pissy at people. But if you look carefully, you'll see that my anger is generally reserved for people who are not presenting themselves as having anything to learn. They're presenting themselves as already knowing the right answer, and so I clash with them. But if I encounter someone who may be wrong, may be confused, but they're trying to learn, I react to those people, and my context-driven values require me to react to such people with tolerance and patience. I have to do that. If I don't do that, my friends like Michael Bolton and Keith Klein they won't talk to me anymore. We hold each other in the context-driven world to a high standard of helping each other and thus leading each other. And when I am coaching somebody, I'm not coaching them to be a good follower. I'm coaching them at all times to become liberated, to become self-confident, not only in dealing with themselves, but in dealing with others too.
So I'm going to weigh in on this one as well, as someone who has hired and is currently hiring context-driven testers specifically and trying to grow them. And I think I have a multi-tiered answer to this. I think from an industry perspective and thought leadership, absolutely, I believe the context-driven testing community is at the white hot core center of thought leadership in software testing. I really believe that. I think the best ideas and all the well thought out approaches and just literally the best stuff is coming out of the context driven testing community and has for some time. So I think from a thought leadership perspective, absolutely. In terms of leadership in a client environment or a project environment, I'm gonna say in my experience, it's a mixed bag. It really is. And I think that as a community, I've seen that there is some inconsistency with how we present ourselves, with what we think a leader is, with what we think being something as simple as a test lead, what that role is, and how that's articulated in a project. So I've found that it's a mixed bag with whether or not context-driven testers make good test leads. In fact, I was talking to Michael about this the other day, that whether or not my view changing on, I would rather grow a context-driven test lead than hire a context-driven test lead into my organization. And I think we've seen, again, mixed reviews or mixed.
Well, what's the problem, Keith?
The problem is that this is the year 2 or year 3 of your tiger cub issue.
Oh, I see.
And that people are not you when you liberate a mind, I personally believe you should feel responsible for that mind.
So
And
we have a kind of an adolescence problem.
yes, we do. And a lot of
And
times,
people have to go through that. You have to go through your adolescence,
yes,
and
and it makes it
that can be
difficult.
awkward.
Yeah, and people, I was tweeting about this the other day, and my view is that if you're a service, not a servant. If you're going to bring your allergies into their environment, I think you might be in the wrong business. And that sounds rather harsh, but I think if you have such a allergic, not you specifically, James, but if people have such an allergic reaction to words, that you're going to have a very difficult time helping people approach solving their problems from a position of humility.
That's true. You're right. Yeah, and that is that's a challenge. It's a challenge for me personally. It's a challenge for others as well. And we need to work on that, and that means that context-driven leaders need to help the new people coming up so that they are able to use their power skillfully and to tell the difference between uh, providing service and being a doormat.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's a fine line there.
Yeah, I'd
And
say you're a service, not a servant, right? But
yeah, yeah. And I feel no problem serving people. I enjoy serving people, and I don't feel belittled. I don't feel any trouble with that. But a lot of people do have problems with that, and they use this process of growing to get over that. That's actually why I titled this "Driving While Driven," because that driving while driven concept is central to how hard it is to be CDT, to be really good at CDT. Because yes, we're driven by the context, but we also drive.
right,
And we've got to know the difference between being imperial or imperious about it and being reasonable about it. Uh, and so and the situation is going to be very different for me than for a lot of other people because I'm running my own business now. I am aware of my own limitations, so I am going to be maybe uh, short-tempered about things that I can be short-tempered about because I'm not working with those people. But if I am on a project long term, I have to be real careful. I
right,
have to be careful because I can't foul the nest, you know.
right,
Once I once you create a feud with somebody, unless they immediately quit and leave, or unless you do, you just have to live with that. So you do not want those feuds.
right,
That's very different from dealing with strangers on Twitter.
right. But that's a common misconception, right? Is that I come across a lot of people very frequently that say, well, context-driven testers or James Bach hates test cases. That you guys don't use test cases, you hate it. And I said that is absolutely not the case. What we what
We
I would
hate the obsession with test cases.
obsession with or mindlessness. That's what it's not about,
Mindlessness,
right?
yes,
Is
right.
doing
That's right.
things perfunctory as opposed to thinking about what you're doing. And I've heard you describe in classes where you've used test cases where maybe you're
Yes.
testing class A medical devices or you need to
Yeah, absolutely.
but you
That,
use it in
that's
an
right.
appropriate manner. And so anyway, I think it's a mixed bag on. I think they can. I think you're right. Our community is in an adolescence, and as well, I'm biased as well. Coming, most of my 20-year career is spent in a very structured corporate environment where communications and politics are incredibly important, and then we get into the wild in the community where we've got our own mediums for talking to each other and our own kind of social mores and everything else, and those things don't always translate. So I'm used to different level and type of communication and talking to folks, which actually ties in nicely to a question we've got from Albert Gareve in
Okay.
Toronto that I want to make sure we get to. I will probably have to make this last question.
All right.
So which ties in nicely to Albert's question, which is his question is, hi, it's Albert from Toronto. In part one, James mentioned that many clients don't get testing and want irrelevant things, test case artifacts, scripts, and so on. In my opinion, they still deserve a professional testing service. How would you advise to engage and educate them?
I'm not sure they do deserve a professional testing service. I don't think that we could just say that everybody deserves to have great work done for them, regardless of the horrible conditions that they create or the unreasonable demands that they make. Um, so I question the premise a little bit, but nevertheless, here's this typical situation. A typical situation is somebody comes to me and they're a fan, they're sold, they drunk the Kool-Aid, right? They're context driven, yay. And they hire me. And then they assign me to work with someone who has not done any of that. And what am I going to do? Immediately quit? No, I'm going to try to make it work. I'm going to try to make it work. So I need the skills. I need to practice. I need to have patience, explaining things. So I size up the situation. I size up the kind of person I'm dealing with. If I'm dealing with a strong-minded person, I might go right at them with an argument. If I'm dealing with someone who I judge might feel intimidated by me, I might do a more spirally kind of indirect approach that's more based on, why don't we just try something specific and see how you feel about it. One technique that I've used, and I love this technique because it doesn't just work for me, it works against me too. I have had people successfully use this to oppose me, so I know it's a good technique. Um, and that's the technique of saying, you know what, instead of saying that there's a policy for this or a policy for that, can we just try my idea that you're skeptical about? Can we try my idea for a week as an experiment and just see? And if you don't like it, then we can stop. We'll have a conversation about it and we'll mend it, we'll change it, we'll stop it. In other words, let me do this and I promise you're not stuck with it. It's
Right.
not a speak now, defend the walls of Stalingrad situation. Okay, let's just give it a try. And I have been in horrible arguments with people about, do they want to build a tool that I think is ridiculous, and then they'll say the same thing to me, like, can we just try it as an experiment? And it really works, because I'll go, well, I know what's going to happen at this experiment, so go right ahead, dig your own grave, and then I'll bury you in it and put the dirt on. But the thing is that once in a while, these experiments that I predict will go badly have a surprising positive result. And I have to admit, oh, okay, that's what you were talking about. Well, that's not so bad. And over the few times that this happened, I realized that there is a consolation prize you get whenever you lose an argument like that. And the consolation prize is you get sort of points for acknowledging that you have been persuaded. And people tend to be very grateful that you acknowledge that they persuaded
Yeah,
you,
it's part
and
of the
then
kind
they'll
of
do
social
things for you.
negotiation for getting things done. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll. So I was arguing with Matt Heuser, who you know very well, the other day, and he so showed me that I was wrong about some opinion that I had about him or something he was doing, and I've got this perverse pleasure from saying, you were right. I am convinced that you were right about that. You know, I'm sorry for giving you all this trouble about it. And it's good. It's good practice to do that, and it's strangely useful in persuading them the next time that you want to win an argument. You kind of have a little, green check mark in their ledger, and they become a little easier to
Yeah.
persuade next time.
Like,
So there's a lot of different techniques, I guess, but one of them is this idea of propose an experiment, propose a trial, propose a pilot, make sure it's not something that's going to take very long, propose a demonstration, and show them that they're safe, that it's going to be okay. You don't need all this paperwork necessarily. There may be an alternative which keeps you safe, which you could be proud of, which you can take credit for, and it'll be all right.
I think a couple things I would pick up on this question is that, whenever I hear somebody say the word deserve, it always reminds me of that scene from Unforgiven when Clint Eastwood's about to shoot Gene Hackman in the face, and he says, "I didn't deserve this," and Clint Eastwood says, "Deserves has nothing to do with it." Um, so I don't think anybody deserves anything. But the two things in here, I think one, you need to figure out why you're there, and if you're there just to do what they want and performing tasks, which are very legitimate gigs, and sometimes that's what you're there for. Then I think that resets your course for how much advisory work you're going to do. Because if you're working as a consultant and you're there as a doctor, and that's another thing I found with context-driven test leads, is that they sometimes forget as a consultant you're there as a doctor, which means you're helping sick people. They don't get it already, which is why we're there to help them. But as well, that has to comes with, in the second part of the question here, educating them. And I think that's another issue as a community we need to deal with, is I hear that word's thrown around a lot. And my experience has been tied directly into a lot of techniques that James talked about, and trying to turn projects towards CDT or introduce new ideas. If your initial starting position is from one of humility and trying to self-educate, not I'm trying to teach you something about how the world works, but taking a starting position of help me understand why you do the things the way you do, so I can learn from you. My success rate with getting people to eventually open up and talk about things is tremendously higher than when I've come at it from a position of, well, you're doing it wrong. Let me tell you how you do this right. So I think first, Albert, is to try and understand why you're there, and that ties in nicely to James's point about really understanding how things work where you are, because they might be telling you that you're there to consult, but there's absolutely no evidence of that. Then you could quickly realize you're not there to consult and there to just do some tasks. You can rethink, if you want to continue.
Well,
Particularly if you're a consultant.
Keith, I think you are the only company really developing expertise in this. I think you're at the tip of the spear of CDT as far as knowing how to sell it in a way that people will buy it. Because we used to say at ST Labs that you can sell people things that they want, but you can't sell them things that they need.
Right.
You might say, you really need this, and they go, but I don't want it. I don't want it. So, sell me that other thing over there. Well, you don't need that. Yeah, but I want it. So
Yeah.
shut up and give it to me. And so if you're going to actually help people, I mean, it can be a delicate matter. I just ask you to remember the difference between drug dealers and doctors. Drug dealers are completely focused on customer service. Doctors have other priorities. So a good doctor doesn't just say, what drug can I prescribe that will make the patient happiest? They have to think, what drug will I prescribe that will be responsible in terms of doing no harm and helping my long-term interests of my client.
Right.
The drug dealers don't care about that, and I keep seeing these consulting companies that are essentially drug dealers. They've fallen into the complete drug dealer mentality of, if they're still alive and they're not complaining, whatever we gave them must have been good. Plus, we're getting a lot of money for it, So everybody's happy.
Right.
That's the drug dealer dynamic right there. So we're more than that, but even a doctor has to be mindful, and which is why a good doctor, a good dentist will say things to you like, okay, I'm going to do this thing right now, and here's why I'm doing it, and here's what you can expect will happen, and it might hurt a little bit here and there. Let me know if it does. A good doctor is going to let you into the process and explain it and basically try to sell you on this thing that is almost always unpleasant that you have to go through.
Right.
And they care about selling you and bringing you along on that. Um, and funnily enough, I was dealing with a doctor the other day, and she was a lot younger than me, which I just noticed for the first time, as I'm dealing with this doctor who looked like she was maybe 30, and she was small too. And I was telling her what I needed and what was going on, and I asked for antibiotics, and she said I didn't need antibiotics, and I was like, yes, I damn well do. And she agreed to give me antibiotics, and I stopped her and I said, wait a minute, you can't just agree because I just intimidated you. Let's go over this again and let me try to convince you why I have an infection. It's been going on for a month. Which virus does that? And I went on and on about it, and she finally gave me signs that she followed my reasoning about my symptoms and wasn't just trying to get out of the room as fast as she could because she thought I was going to, I don't know, hit her or something. But she seemed like wide-eyed and a little terrified when I lost my temper when she wasn't listening to my symptoms. And I never noticed that before because I think I'm older now, and I just happened to come across this young doctor who I really felt like, I used to think of doctors as really powerful, but in this case, I felt like I had a lot of power as the patient, and I have to dial that down. So in the
Yeah.
end, I was there with my wife, and in the end, I apologized to her, and we shook hands and talked a little bit about the dynamic, and because I didn't want to leave it like that, and I feel better. I think she did too. But it was surprising just because that had never happened to me before. Every other time I went into a doctor's office, the doctor is the one who seems powerful compared to me.
Well, that's the power of the information age and WebMD and all the research you can do online. And I've had chats with my doctor about that, about the influence of drug companies and people coming in asking for drugs. Whereas, 10 years ago, he was doing the prescribing. And now people are coming in who have talked to their insurance companies and saying, well, you should go talk to your doctor about XYZ drug, which has totally changed his relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So look,
Anyway, okay.
I'm gonna wrap
Thanks
us
for
up
doing
there,
this.
James. Thank you ever so much as usual. A great pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for the folks who have listened, and I think this is a great start to the webinar series from the AST. Look out for future recordings or events with Michael Bolton and Anne Marie. And thanks again, James, and we'll speak to everyone soon. Thank you.